Welcome, chess family. It is time that we learn how the pieces move. It's about that time, right? Okay, so first we'll look at the pawns. You have to know one rule. White moves first all of the time. Okay? So if black attempts to move first, you have to let him know or her know that they have to put the piece back or take the move back. White moves first all of the time. That is the first rule of chess. Okay? So now, when we're dealing with pawn movements, only on the first move, you can either move once or twice. So, while the pawns are originally placed on the second rank, white pawns that is, a white pawn on the second rank has the option. They can move to the third or the fourth. The black pawns, likewise, on the seventh rank. They can move up one square or two squares, but only on the first move, only on its original rank or its original square or its original position. Once a pawn moves from its original position, it can no longer jump two squares up. Okay, so once the white pawns move from the second rank, it can no longer jump two squares. Or if the black pawns move from the seventh rank, it can no longer jump two squares to the fifth rank. Rooks can move horizontally and vertically. They can move horizontally square by square or one square at a time, or the rook can move horizontally from, as you can see, D3. That rook can jump all the way to H3, or it can move one square to E3. They move vertically, so it can move up across the whole entire board, upwards or downwards. So that rook from D3, it can move one square to D2 on one move, or for one move, it can jump from D3 to D8. Okay, so if you look at the green squares, that lets you know from one move, the rook can jump all the way from C6 to H6. Or it can jump from C6 to E6. It can jump two squares. Or it can jump one square. It can go from C6 to B6. So just know that from one single move, the rook can fly across the entire board or half of the board or just one square. Okay, so now let's move on to the bishops. Bishops only move on a diagonal. So the white bishop that's placed on D5, he can only move across the white diagonals. It cannot move from one color to another color. So you have the dark bishop on E5. It can go across the board one square at a time, or like a rook, it could jump from E5 all the way to B8, or from E5 to A1, but it has to stay on its own color. And likewise, when we look at the light color bishop, it only can move on the light squares. Now, a knight. The knight is the most difficult piece to move because unlike the other pieces, the knight neither moves on a diagonal, it does not move on the vertical, it does not move on the horizontal. In order for a knight to move, it must land on opposite color squares. Some say in an L shape. So when we look at the opposite color squares surrounding the knight, we see that they are on the knight's top left, bottom right, and top right. Now, a knight dominates 8 different squares when it's centered in the center of the board or near the center of the board. When you place the knight on the top edge or bottom edge or the side of the board, a knight is only half effective. Look at this diagram. Because this knight is on the side of the board, it is only attacking 4 different squares. So this knight is half effective. Knights belong in the center of the board where they are most dominant and they can attack their full potential, which is 8 different squares, or somewhere near the center of the board. Okay, now look at the queen. The queen is the most dominant piece on the board. This is why it's worth 9 points, because it can move vertically, horizontally, and on a diagonal. It can move across the board, one move at a time, or it can fly across the board like the bishop and the rook. So a queen is really like 2 bishops and a rook in one, or almost. A king can only move 1 square at a time, but in any direction. So a king is like a mini queen, basically. So this king right here can move. Now he's on d4. He can move any direction, but 1 square at a time. So he can move to c3, he can move to c4, he can move to c5, 1 move at a time. Or he can move to d3, or he can move to d5, or he can move to e3, he can move to e4, he can move to e5. So basically the only piece that cannot move backwards is the pawns. Every other piece can jump backwards, sideways, and forwards.